Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media. UMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing, and strives to contribute for an evidence-led and evidence-rich discourse and decision-making in the Horn of Africa. Today, we are back again with the H panel, otherwise called the Horn panel. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Please share, like, and subscribe so that we have more audience for our content. The H panel today is back with the panelists, Professor Eskel Kapisa from Michigan, Yusuf Gabrahewat, and Faisal Robler from LA, Los Angeles. Welcome, gentlemen, again. Nice to have you on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So the topic we have for today, the state of the region, latest developments. It's not easy to catch up with what's happening. Things happen even when we are live. So we'll try to cover the most important ones according to each one of the panelists. So as usual, we start with what was the big ticket item for each one of the panelists. So today, let me start with Eskel. Professor Eskel, what stood out for you this week?
Not much. It's a continuation of last week, except that what I observed this week is the irony that the new government in Ethiopia that was sworn in about 2 weeks ago or so, and only 2 weeks after it was sworn in as a new government, is looking a lot more like the old. That the Ethiopian government now looks like more like the Derg government in its last days, in its approach to governing, in the political rhetoric it uses, and the strategies it employs against the TDF. So what is distinct today as a result of this fast-paced events unfolding in the Horn of Africa, it's the incoherence, the ambivalence, and the utter confusion on the part of the Prosperity Party, its officials. In just one day, you could see the Prime Minister saying in the morning he doesn't want war, he doesn't want to purchase tanks, he wants combiners. That same night, he would go on Ethiopian television and justifies why he's continuing aerial campaign against Tigrayans, that he would continue to drop bombs relentlessly. And the next morning, he would say he's ready to talk, but puts conditions for the TDF to respond to. So the confusion, the utter confusion, not knowing exactly 2 weeks after how to govern, how to prosecute the war, and how to deal with the international arena is something that I thought was new, in the sense that it's a continuation. It's not new that it is confused, but it just came to broad daylight these days. It's prosperity government officials talk about responding to the TDF in kind, saying that the language that the TDF and the Tigray government understands is only force and violence, so they will respond in kind. But at the same time, the other side of their mouth, I just heard it on VOA, the other side of the mouth, they say they want to talk. That is the ambivalence, that they don't want to admit defeat and ask for negotiations, but they show that ambivalence, the braggadocio on the one hand, and the beseeching others to mediate. And there was, of course, evident that there is some infighting within the government of Ethiopia because they really don't know what to do now. And one of the things that I saw because of this, but maybe some other evidence as well, is on the international media. Some are developing, but one in Der Spiegel, they have started to recognize Abiy Ahmed for who he is. They have come out and say that he is basically delusional. So events are catching up, and the world that bestowed the Nobel Peace Prize on him is now understanding that it is a delusional man leading a country of 110 million people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Talking about the, you talk about the air raid, and this is the latest. Yesterday, Magala was again air bombed, and at least based on Al Jazeera, 10 people were killed, including children. And this is a mother of two talking about what happened to her and in relation to her children.
ከባቢታት ዝገብር ሎ ህዝቢ ዓለም ክፈልጠና ኢና እንደሊ ኣብ ግንባር ኣብ ግንባር ልፈጥሮ ሎ እዚ ሰብኣውነት እርዳታ ስታይና ገይርና ዮ እዚ ንሕና ገይርና ኣለና ስለዚ በቃ ህዝቢ ዓለም ንሕና እንደለና ላሲ ላው ንጹህ ዝጋስ አይደብረና ይቃ ሰባው ዝማዓት ማዕናጡ ጤና ናውጽለና ርእሲና ንፈልለና እንደ ሰብ ይቦሳቀል ኖታቲና ናውጽና ነና ስለዚ ዓለም በቃ ቀልጢፉ ስጉምቲ ኮስና ኣለና.
Yeah, so it's a sad story of disturbing story coming out of residential areas bombed by Ethiopian Air Force yesterday. Yosef, what stood out for you this week since we met last time?
Well, primarily it's of course Dessie front, but what I was interested was in how the Dessie front, you know, if Tigray captures both Dessie and Kombolcha, that events, you know, certain events will simply bypass. For example, a good example of that would be the ICG report that they have sent to us. I think he sent it us today, and I was looking at it a few days before, and I've always thought that the ICG is the Trojan horse in this crisis.
That's the international crisis group.
Yeah, that's the international crisis group. Yeah, and if you have carefully read it, you will see three things that it came up with. One was that it wanted the world to support President Obasanjo as the mediator. The other one was the demilitarization of Western Tigray, which it said its proposal was for the UN and the AU peacekeepers to take over. And the last one was that the Tigray leaders should freeze their offensive. Now, if you look at them, you know, because I have been following ICG, I mean, for years, you know, especially because of the Eritrean crisis, and they have a clever way of undermining whom they want to undermine and supporting whom they want to support. Now, think about the first one, President Obasanjo. If you remember, I'm not sure if you have read it, but Mulugeta Gebrehiwot, he wrote an excellent article on why President Obasanjo, as a mediator, is a non-starter, given that it's AU bias. For example, two things are mentioned in that article. One was that Musa Faki, the very person who endorsed the military campaign of Ethiopia at the very beginning, saying that it's a law and order campaign, was the one who nominated Obasanjo. And the second one was Obasanjo himself. He had he was one of the observers in the election, in the previous election, I mean, in the recent election in Ethiopia. While the West boycotted it, he was not only an observer over there, but he also proclaimed that it was credible. Now, because of these reasons, Mulugeta Gabriel would say that it's a non-starter. He's biased for that one. The second one is the demilitarization of the flashpoint area of West Tigray. Now, imagine this one is a very tricky one. What they did was they came up with a scenario which is not plausible. What they said was, if Tigray reaches the border of Sudan, and if it began to be armed by, let's say, by the Sudanese or Egyptians, then Ethiopia would declare war on Sudan. There will be a regional chaos, a bigger regional chaos than we have seen up to now. It's funny because Ethiopia, at this point in time, its military is facing a meltdown, and it's in no position to declare a bigger war to Sudan than it's doing right now. So why did the ICG wanted to do that? That's the whole idea. I believe what they were doing was by giving this, by providing this worst scenario, they are trying to convince the powers to be to send the UN and the AU peacekeepers to where? To Western Tigray. Now, it seems as if they are, I mean, practically, literally, they are, what they were doing was they were endorsing the Amhara-Eritrean strategy. Amhara-Eritrean strategy is Tigray should never get access to Sudan. It's the same strategy, only in their case, instead of Amhara and Tigrayan troops residing in Western Tigray, it will be the task of UN and the AU peacekeepers to keep that area off Tigray. And then, of course, what they said was they also proposed a joint kind of administration at the beginning in Western Tigray, and after that, they said that they could even imagine, a Kilil, an independent administrative, independent of both the Amhara and Tigray. So all the aim is how not to let Tigray reach the borders of Sudan. Okay, the last one is, of course, the Tigray should freeze their offense. Again, if you look at the unilateral ceasefire of Ethiopia, at that time, they didn't do anything to, I mean, what they are saying is if Tigray leaders stop their offense, then the humanitarian access will be given to Tigray. But that thing hasn't worked up to now, and it doesn't seem to work later. So I'm always fascinated by how ICG keeps undermining Tigray and at the same time supporting Ethiopian unity and stability by coming out with proposals that seem to be plausible, but in the end are no different than what the allied forces, the Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Amhara are doing. So anyway, it seems to me now, if the offensive succeeds, which is most probably it has already succeeded, then this proposal of ICG will be a non-event, as many others. For example, the Americans also are going to come up after November 1 with some kind of proposals. But that too will be, I believe, a non-event because these events are overtaking them. That's why I consider the offensive in Dessie and Kombolcha to be pivotal in what is happening now. All right. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yosef. I think I will ask Sgail and Faisal as well to comment on the ICG recommendation. But continuing with the same fashion, Faisal, what were the big ticket items for you this week? You are muted, Faisal. Let me just.
Yes. Thank you, Getachew. Both of my friends really set the tone for what stands up this week. So I will not rehash that. I'll just move forward and see what I can add to that. I think what stood out for me is, number one, the number of press releases that the U.S. State Department conducted beginning from the 22nd of October all the way to 29th. None of them speak to politics. They all speak about humanitarian aid and the AGOA potential impact of the workers in Ethiopia. One of the senators, as well as the U.S. ambassador in Addis Ababa, visited a couple of sites where jobs may be lost. But coming back from there, he never said we will change the course of the United States, but he said something akin to expecting that the Ethiopian government may change course so that such sanctions don't go forward. So from 22nd October to 29th, when I surveyed all the press and tweets that's coming from the State Department, none of them speak to politics. They all speak about the humanitarian. What that tells us is that the US is trying to move away from suggesting at this particular time modalities and formulas as to how to address the issue, but stay within the realm of international aid and help and humanitarian situation. The other thing that stood up for me, and I will not rehash the international, except that the delay of the $500 million that would have given to Safaricom in order that purchase to take place, and the US seems to be also stopping that, and a lot of business entities are literally writing off Ethiopia as a potential investment space, especially when you layer that with the IMF's recent report of Ethiopia's economic forecast, which was literally avoided, literally giving blank to Ethiopia. Other than that, I think what I'm more interested in what's happening and in the internal dynamics of Ethiopia. When you hear the government propaganda as well as its supporters throughout, the war is no longer one as it's billed at this point in time between the TDF and entirely the Ethiopian government. The war is billed as one that's taking place between TDF/Tigray and Amharas who are defending their land. This is not coming only from lower level propaganda. This is coming from the highest. Even the Bahir Dar meeting that unexpectedly be organized in a very hasty way, it's more and more speaking about the youth and the citizens defending their country. I think somebody can read into that a sort of like the crumpling of the National Defense Force of Ethiopia, which we have seen practically. People are saying or asking the question of how can Ethiopia defend Desse when it hasn't defended all the way from the Tigray border to where the war is taking place now, which is one of the largest cities in Ethiopia. The other thing that just stood up for me is the demand is that we shared, all of us, that Tigray is putting forth, which is contradicting in a way what the gentleman who published his paper in the peace journal that Alex Tiwal manages. I think there is a notion among some Tigraynya leaders that a referendum is a must. Whether it is an option on the table or TDF decided to condition future talks with the issue of referendum to be taken a la Eritrea's 1994 referendum, I think that needs to be cleared carefully with the TDF. What I like, honestly, to talk as we move forward with this discussion, besides the military front, which we can all stipulate that it's probably, this is a huge, because we cannot tell, could take some time, anywhere from, nearest time up to a drag and entrenched conflict around Desse. I think what we have been talking less and less about is what the future holds for Ethiopia in the current situation. Are we looking at Ethiopia where TDF and OLA and others will completely really overrun the Ethiopian army and the government, and that is the agenda? Or there are multiple agendas by the different groups in Ethiopia, including TDF, OLA, Sudan Liberation Front, even Somalis, where multinational, federal talk is no longer on the table, simply because the current situation is moving faster than the proposal of gathering multinational groups, especially if TDF is putting on the table a referendum. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Faisal. I'm glad you mentioned about today's Bahir Dar meeting. It included all from the regional states. Actually, they said, I don't know if that forum existed before, but they call it the Federal and Regional Executive and I think security officials. And they had a declaration or a press release, if you can call it. Let me play from that, and I want to ask Professor Esgail to comment, and Yosef and Faisal as well, as you did. So this is a declaration, and there is from the Amhara Media Corporation.
ህወሓት የጀመረው ሀገር የማውደምና የማፍረስ ተልእኮ በመደበኛ ወታደራዊ አደረጃጀት ብቻ መቀልበስና መቅበር አይቻልም። መላውን የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ በማነቃነቅና ባለቤት በማድረግ የሀገርን ህልውና ከሁሉ አቀፍ ጥቃት መከላከል ያስፈልጋል። የምንከተለው የዘመቻ ስልት የሽብር ቡድኑን አቅምና የክፋት ምኞቱን በመስበር ሀገር የማፍረስ ህልሙን ለአንድና ለመጨረሻ ጊዜ ማምከን መሆን አለበት። አቅሙን መስበር ስንል የሽብር ቡድኑ ያሰለፈውን መሳሪያና ወራሪ ኃይል በመደምሰስ እኩይ ፍላጎቱን ለመጨረሻ ጊዜ መቀልበስ ማለታችን ነው። የክፋት ምኞቱን መስበር ስንልም የሽብር ቡድኑ ህወሓትም ሆነ ኢትዮጵያን ለማፍረስ ህቡና ግልጽ ሚና ያላቸው የክፋት ኃይሎች አንድ እርምጃ ከመራመዳቸው በፊት 10 ጊዜ ለማሰብ እንዲገደዱ ማድረግ ነው።
This is a translation of what they are saying. It's impossible to undo and bury the mission of destroying and disintegrating the country started by TPLF. And then it's saying that it can't be done by a regular military organization. So it's calling for to protect the very existence of the country from an all-out onslaught by mobilizing and making the entire Ethiopian people own it. Esgail, I don't know if you followed that and if you knew about this meeting. So, what do you make of this?
No, I haven't listened to it. I read some reports from Ethiopia, and I didn't know that they were going to meet as well. In fact, because this body that was assembled in Bahir Dar, it's not a constitutional body. No announcement was made. No law was passed by the parliament that was constituting the federal officials and regional officials to be in the same body in deliberating and deciding the future of the country. That is simply indicative of what Abiy Ahmed had been doing, now formalizing it in an institution where regional government leaders and the federal government are together working to make policies. So that is basically showing the centralization of power in the Prime Minister's office. So I didn't know about it because I haven't heard about such a body where the regional governments and the federal government actually sit together and formulate policies, simply against the conception of the Constitution that these regions are actually co-sovereign. So I did not know about it. But what I understand from what was announced, the resolution that we just heard, is that when they say that we cannot simply continue to prosecute the war and hope to defeat the distractive mission of the TPLF, what they mean is that because the TPLF has made the war the people's war, had mobilized the people of Tigray, or the state of Tigray, both in Tigray and outside Tigray, mobilized them into supporting the cause for which they are fighting, then Ethiopia must also do the same thing. On the one hand, that is simply an admission of defeat, or maybe recognition of the imminent defeat that is going to happen. Basically, that's what the recognition is. They have been mobilizing since June. In July, in August, in September, they've been mobilizing the Ethiopian nation, or the Ethiopian nations and nationalities regions, to support the federal government's offensive, or the Amara government's war against Tigray. They have done that. That means that too is not enough, has not translated into a coherent action against Tigray. I think we're going to come and talk about the war itself, where it is, so I will not delve into that, but it simply is that they're trying to make this war the people's war, and that is the chatter within the party, that Ethiopia may not be able to win the war militarily or in the war front, but by mobilizing the country and sending more and more young people, more bodies to the front line. In that way, they will be able to wear down the Tigrayan Defense Forces, that they will keep killing the new recruits, that the Tigrayans would simply keep killing more and more people, and then they will be exhausted. And once they're exhausted, the Ethiopians could declare victory. So, but basically, that's what they're saying. They're, in a way, admitting that militarily, in the war front, they're not doing very well. So the new tactic is to use human bodies, to use the waves of young people. Remember what he said once about sending suicide bombers to Cairo, that he said, we have the manpower. And that's basically what he's banking on, that the Tigrayans would run out of munitions, they would run out of the will to fight, they will wear out, they will be tired, and then Ethiopia will declare victory that way. So that is how I interpret what happened in Bahir Dar today.
Great, thank you, Prof. Yosef, you can build on that if you will. Otherwise, I want you to comment on, given that we have a regional perspective, since we met last time, Sudan has been in a different trajectory. And as we hear, actually today, some hours ago, the military council leader, he mentioned about appointing a new premier. So there were people who were discussing about who is behind this. Is it just only Sudan's domestic issue, or there could be even the Ethiopian, the Eritrean factor, or even beyond? So what is that telling us in terms of the war that we'll be talking shortly about? What is your take on that?
All right, okay. On the first question, as Professor Hiskiel has said, it's an admission that the military campaign has failed, and the alternative that they are talking about, mobilizing the people, that's exactly what they have been doing. So I don't see anything new coming out of it. On the Sudanese one, to me, it has become a riddle when it comes to talking about Eritrea and Ethiopia in the political crisis in Sudan. This is why. First of all, the Sudanese are being supported. I mean, the Sudanese military is being supported by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. That by itself will tell you. So the very fact that it's being supported by Egypt, it will tell you that Ethiopia is not going to gain anything out of it. The same is true also on the Eritrean side, except it's a little bit complicated. Eritrea has always had a leverage on the eastern part of Sudan, on the Beja tribes that live on the eastern part of Sudan, and we have seen how they played a critical role in this coup d'état. They were the first ones to say that the civilian government should step down and the military should take over. But I doubt also at the same time that Eritrea would gain anything out of this, because there are two things that we are looking at. Well, the way it could gain is roughly, for example, we talked about the alliance of dictators in the region before. So, in a way, an additional dictator in the region will be plus in general, will be a plus to Isaiah's campaign of creating an alliance of dictators in that area. But we have to temper that one by saying, because of the difference between Ethiopia and Eritrea along the border, due to a border dispute and the Renaissance Dam, the Eritrea, I don't see how Eritrea would gain out of this coup d'etat. Now, you can see, for example, why the Egyptians are supporting a military regime in Sudan. First of all, of course, they don't want a democratic country as a neighbor, which is clear. It's more or less the same as in Isaiah's case. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt are determined not to see a full-blown democracy in the neighborhood, and that is clear. But to me, what I'm saying is that there is no. People are saying, for example, that Ethiopia and Eritrea could have a hand in this coup d'etat. I don't believe so. I don't believe so, because they are not gonna gain anything out of it. But Eritrea could gain indirectly. One, as I said, it's a dictator, the coming of another dictator in the neighborhood. And two, the very idea of a destabilized nation. Having a destabilized nation in the neighborhood in Sudan is also another one of the tools that Isaias uses to put pressure on that nation. So this is how I see it. But besides that, it has become a riddle to me how to figure out how to see an advantage from the Ethiopian and Eritrean side in this coup d'etat.
Thank you. I think Faisal, you want to jump in, and I want to ask you as well to make a case because this I found this from the Ugandan Diaspora Council, a very timely call. I wish this came early on, and it's heard by many, and others also do. So the bottom line is where it says Abiy's genocidal war is not our war. So they are actually saying they would support financially those who would defect from the DU units. These are the special forces, regional forces. Other person who have been following this closely, you can comment as well on that, but jump in on what was being discussed.
No, on the earlier issue of the Bahir Dar, meeting, which, as Scale said, was just out of the blues, nothing attached to the framework of the governance that exists now in Ethiopia. I think the tea leaves that we can read from there is consistent. What Abiy was saying and what that declaration said is very much consistent with the fiasco that's taking place in and around Gondar and in the entire Amara region. When you look at the competing and disparate forces that say they will defend their turf, whether it's the Fano, the Amara Nationalist Groups, the Liu Police, the federal forces, there is no coherent entity that is now receiving one single order from a single center. There's no command center that's running the war. So I think two things that could happen with this call that Abiy and his team made. On the one hand, yes, it's a clear indication that the war in the military sense seems to be lost on the side of the government. But at the same time, I think Scale's presentation or response to this issue reminded me the other side of the coin, which could be very dangerous, that maybe in a desperate last minute, Abiy and company could even ignite, not so far, but as a last step, ignite a full-blown civil war, a la Sarajevo, where they would literally bankroll and invest ethnic groups killing each other. And that's the only reason why a government, a sitting government with the title of a prime minister would call, a call for arms, not to the army, not to the militia, but to the citizens. So now if a angry Amara slaughters an Oromo who is suspected of siding with Tigray or a Tigray businessman, all those are in the game. So I think those two readings should keep those two readings into this situation. In terms of what you posted, I think that's not only limited to Somalis. I think in a lot of multinational groups in the Ethiopian theater today are sitting on the fences. The folks that Abiy assembled, as you showed us in that little video in Bahir Dar, are just one small, tiny, irregular aspect of the political framework that we are in today. The big picture that is taking place in Ethiopia in every nationality is the expectation, the wishing of the masses of the PP and the downfall of the Abiy. That's not only in the Somali you see in the Oromo, in the Sidama, in the Hadia. So this Ogaden Diaspora Council, which was active in the early years of 2000, 2010, when the Somali region experienced a notorious blockade, like the one Tigray is now experiencing. This group was very active in helping and publicizing their case and approaching Amnesty and Red Cross and what have you. This is a token to show to Somalis as well as to the other groups, particularly to Tigray, that Somalis don't have a stake in the way that the government is putting. They have a stake in the dispensation and the final results of the war, i.e. the overthrow of PP. They have a huge stake, and that's the conversation you hear in Chichiga, in Dredawa, in Dagahbur, everywhere. And the same issue I covered on my Facebook, where I was saying, how should we read Tigray's war? What is in it for us? What is Tigray for us? What happens if Tigray wins? And it was hugely responded by my followers, who all really expressed that the need for PP to disappear and leave the political scene is across the board, with the exception of the ruling elite. That's number one. Number two, people are expecting a call from all. As you know, there are Somali groups who are moving around, or ONLF is laying low because of security issues and the heavy hand that they feel coming from Mustafa, who is very close to the Amara elite. As late as today, they were they said the only two people that qualify Ethiopian elite were because they were mentioning how TDF says the Amara elite. So they exemplified Abiy as an Amara elite in the eyes of Tigray, and Mustafa as an, Amara elite in the eyes of TPLF. So I think ONLF is laying low, but there is a unanimous consensus among Somalis that the direction the war in Tigray and the north is taking place is akin to the 1991 war, but this time different. This time, the call would be one at the end of the day that's very inclusive, that's not dominated by one side. And I think this token that you see is a signal that represents the voices of millions of Somalis in the Somali regional state.
Thank you, Faisal. So on that note, maybe we can talk about how we see the next week will be playing out. But I think not talking about what happened in Magala last time in terms of the UN airplane, all that would be a miss. So let me just play this. This is from CNN, and this is a WFP chief talking about what happened then.
It was moving in the right direction. And now we're barely getting enough trucks into the Tigray northern Ethiopian area, maybe to support 15% of the people. I don't know where they're getting the food from. Hopefully we will come out of the field in the next few weeks showing the reality that exists, but there's no way that the people are surviving there. We're out of fuel, we're out of cash in terms of paying our people, and we're running out of money, and we can't get our trucks in. I had literally 10 trucks that would provide the fuel that we need to push food and medicines out there for a solid 2 weeks. Just for 2 weeks, 10 trucks. Been sitting at a checkpoint, guess how long? 2 months.
2 months.
Months.
And you run the fuel, as I understand it, for other agencies.
So we move the fuel for other agencies that are also feeding people, providing medical care, all the humanitarian needs, and the people that are in crisis because the economy there is completely shut down because of the war. Everybody's to blame. There's no doubt about it. And for us not even to be able to get our fuel trucks in, this is disgraceful.
What do you understand to have happened late last week with the UN flight that was rerouted back from Mekelle? What happened?
Well, we fly at WFP, we call it UNHAS, flies from Addis into Mekelle, and that's where we deliver our humanitarians and cash to pay our humanitarians and workers on the ground there. And the flight had been, because we deconflict, we work in war zones. We know how to do this. We do it all the time, whether it's Yemen, Syria, doesn't matter. So we're pros, experts of working in combat areas. We deconflict, all sides are put on notice, they agree, the plane's flying in, it's a few minutes for landing, and guess what? Boom. There's an explosion on the ground right near the airport, a military strike. I mean, come on. You knew our plane was in the air. How can this happen? Obviously, abort, and we go back to Addis Ababa. What if our plane had been shot out of the air, intentionally or unintentionally? This is reckless. It's a reckless disregard of the humanitarian needs on the ground by all sides.
He mentioned a couple of times both sides.
Both sides.
Yeah, I was thinking of what Joseph was saying before. So Joseph, you can start commenting on that and how you see the coming days until maybe we meet next Friday playing out in terms of the war front and everything else.
Well, I mean, they have been saying, for almost 11 months, they have been able to pinpoint where the problem is, yet they haven't done anything. I mean, the world body, be it the UN or other humanitarian organizations. So to me, it seems that it is what's happening is on the battleground will decide how things will go on. For example, the way it's going on in the area of Dessie and Kombolcha, although it's really hard to say that given it's a war of attrition, there might be some kind of delay. I'm not sure about that, but it seems the way it's going on right now, at the pace it's going on right now, if the TDF manages to occupy both Dessie and Kombolcha, let's say in the coming week, to make it to give it some time, then I think things will happen. Things will begin to happen. Last time, if you remember, I talked about, I mentioned about 7 points on how the occupation of Dessie and Kombolcha would be pivotal, strategically and otherwise. For example, people have been saying that almost 75% of the Ethiopian army is now involved at the Dessie front, which means if you get rid of these people, some of them have already died, many of them have been wounded, and thousands have been taken, have been captured as prisoners. So it seems that there is a meltdown of the Ethiopian army in the Dessie front. So it's very hard to imagine that Ethiopia, after this war, that Ethiopia will manage that the Ethiopian army will manage to reorganize itself to conduct another offensive. So that's why I call this one is pivotal. In addition to that, we have already seen how strategically, it's a bottleneck. It's a bottleneck, which means that once they capture that area, the entire Afar front will be cleared of allied forces, be it Ethiopian Afar or Amhara forces, which in turn means that the entire tens of thousands of TDF soldiers who have been defending the area from Adigrat to all the way to Kombolcha, about 400 kilometers long of escarpment. That entire army will have to be redeployed somewhere else. I think the biggest dividend of this war, if TDF captures both Kombolcha and Dessie, would be the redeployment of tens of thousands of TDF soldiers, which are now keeping the defense line from Adigrat all the way to Kombolcha, which means that if this army is deployed, in addition to the army that is fighting in the Dessie front, will be deployed in the Shoa front, I don't think the Ethiopian army would have even time to reorganize itself, even as, for example, Hezkel mentioned about this war of attrition by bringing human waves. I don't think they will even have time to reorganize and to do that. So, for me, another one is of course the Djibouti Addis Ababa road. If that also will be taken. If that is taken, then with the fall of Dessie and Kombolcha, that will be taken, and that means that both psychological and economic pressure on Addis Ababa itself. Addis Ababa, to me, is almost a detached city that lives in its own stratosphere. The only way Addis Ababa will feel probably change, in its behavior would be if it feels the heat of the war. And if the road, the Djibouti Addis Ababa road is blocked, it would be the consequences, the economic consequences and the psychological consequences would be immediate. For me, then, the coming week is probably the most important out of all the wars that have been conducted so far, because it will determine the course of the events after that. If TDF manages to capture both these two cities.
Thank you, Yosef. Faisal, I want you to do the same, like show us what you think would be happening in the coming days. But at the same time, I want also to show our reviewers this is not an ordinary person. Professor Masai Kabada is a philosophy professor in the US, and he talks about how this war, this almost 1 year war, is connected in a way with the what was fought during the 17 years of struggle. So this is his post from from Wednesday, just 2 days ago. And I want to highlight one thing that where he says, he talks about conceding defeat or withdrawing to defensive lines inside Tigray, that's TPLF. It has decided to stick to its offensive strategy and so on. So he's talking about, in many ways, this war picks up where the Derg left off. And I don't see this as an isolated remark, because I saw in the media as well, in the pro-Abiy media, where they were talking about the war in 1991 was just paused, not ended, and this is the last war to fight. So the last solution, the last war to undo this. So you can comment on that as well, but how do you see the next days playing out?
Yeah, let me quickly comment on this one, because I see a lot of incoherence in those that try to really justify the current loss in the hands of Ethiopian Defense Forces. I was listening to another pro-Abiy YouTube this afternoon. The same people who were admitting that if any Somali qualifies for what TPLF calls the Amara elite, it's Mustafa. Meaning, and they said, followed that up and said, Amara elite is synonymous to Ethiopian. So they were putting Mustafa and Abiy in this unique category that they assimilated, miscegenated, if I want to use the word that was used during the Black American, era. Miscegenation, assimilation is somebody who lives their culture and what have you, and joins the dominant and imitates that they are part of the dominant. The reason why I'm mentioning that is after a few minutes, they went and they talked how the Ethiopian army laid low, came back and defeated the Somali National Army in 1977. Unfortunately, that's the wrong and false narrative that's now read in so many ways in many fronts of the Ethiopian history, the same way that's now read in the Tigray and Desert front. In 1978, when the Russians literally flew in soldiers from the entire Warsaw Pact, I was in Jigjiga at that time, literally. So the entire suburban parts of Jigjiga were literally lit up to look like a daylight. Even Yemenis, Arab Yemenis who were born to Somali mothers were part of the entire Warsaw Pact. So these are people who are educated, who is repeating this narrative on the one hand, offending, putting Mustafa in this category, forgetting for a moment that he's still Somali, nonetheless, whatever he is, and then going back and coming and rereading the entire Somali history in a way that doesn't fit the Somali person himself, like myself, who is listening, who can read better than they do. So there is this confusion and also recreation of historical narrative that's not objective. That's how I would read what this person is here saying. In terms of what I see, I think I'm one of those people who have long time ago settled for the impending, if nothing short of Ethiopian disintegration is done, Ethiopia will be disintegrating. In 2019, I wrote an article, The Ethnic Strife in Ethiopia. And at that time, what I saw then was not the southern, not the peripheral regions, but the ancient Abyssinian area is the most militarized, one of the most militarized regions in the world. Remember, at the time the Tigray war takes place, we haven't recovered from the Eritrean-Ethiopian war, where the entire northern command was still in Tigray, heavily armed, the same as Eritrea. On the Gondar side and Amara side, you have the Amara nationalists collecting weapons and ideology of war, literally organizing. The Amara-Tigrenya alliance that really held this conquested country together has been broken for a long time. And the issues that we are seeing today is really issues of how should we sort out this breakdown of an ancient alliance that may never come back. And Abiy comes to the scene. Derg did a damage to that alliance, and the alliance is also being broken because of social justice and equality issues. The Derg came and literally eroded some of the pillars of that. Then comes Abiy and his time, and literally with the massacres that have happened, the rape, the destruction, the blockade, and even the propaganda, that alliance is dead for good. That is really where whoever wins the war is the icing on the cake. I think the alliance is dead. Tigray has nowhere to go from the point where they are, because what could happen if they lose the war is, in my opinion, unthinkable, really unthinkable. So, as Joseph alluded, I think the politics has finished at this point in time. The war and the front decided. That's why I started with my conversation, that the West seems to be washing its hands off of the political dynamics of this region. They want to maintain the humanitarian to the extent possible. They have come to grips with the reality that the Ethiopian government in Addis is a total deliberate hindrance to the feeding of the Ethiopian people, whether those people are in Oromo region, in Benishangul, or in Tigray. So they are waiting for the winner, and the winner would be decided, as Joseph touched, on the front of Desse and Kombolcha, because the downfall of those would be humongous in terms of the impact. If Tigray is pushed back, I think their plan B would be to block their boundaries and still fight. If Ethiopia loses Desse and Kombolcha, and the big item that we have not mentioned this afternoon is the convergence of TDF and Ola. Kombolcha and Desse are the first front of the two forces coming and carrying a united operation together all the way down to Addis Ababa. And that capturing of that city is a pivot to the entire politics and world situation that we are in.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Professor Xel, how do you see this coming week playing out in terms of the war front, international domestic dynamics, and all variables that would affect the developments?
Well, I may not be able to speak to all of those categories, but to add just one small contribution in terms of what the implication of the coup d'etat in the Sudan, because we're talking about the Horn, that regardless of why the military did this, but I don't want to go into that at this point in time, but the coup d'etat was precipitated not just because the military wanted it. I think the economic situation in the Sudan is really dire. They're in dire straits. So Sudan is reeling to an uncertain future, maybe the resumption of fighting in several places. It's a deeply divided country at this point in time. The government is totally bankrupt. There is nothing in the treasury. The payment from the South Sudan, about 3.7 billion that they promised at the time of their separation, is coming to an end. The oil facilities that are transferring and the Sudan government hope to collect fees are aging and might break at any time. The assistance from the West, some of them have stopped. And if the Beja now awakened and seeking some revision to the Juba agreement and complaining about representation, as do the Darfurians, that they are not adequately represented in the central government. The Arabs in the Sahel, not integrated as well, also complaining about not being represented in the government. With all the economic malaise and the complaint about not being represented, I think Sudan is in a spiraling situation that the Darfur, the Nubians, and the Blue Nile might resume fighting over economic issues. I think I read something about the IMF saying that the economic situation is in the right direction because inflation had improved, going down to 388%. That's what is considered improvement on the right side. So that's what it is. And with cutting of subsidies to food and fuel, Sudan is in a very deeply worrisome situation. So the implication for Ethiopia or Eritrea is very difficult because Sudan itself may not be able to get its acts together. What would happen in the Sudan is that the military would become more and more repressive, and that society would be completely bifurcated. So there would not be that much of help for Ethiopia or for Eritrea if they had hoped that the coup d'etat and the ascendancy of the military would have helped them. So on the Ethiopian side, I agree with the importance of the fall of Dese and Kombolcha for this reason, for instance. The tactic that the Ethiopian government had been reduced to is the waves of human bodies that they could send to the war front. If you remember, about two months ago, the Tigrayan Defense Forces decided that they're not going to treat the waves. They're not just going to kill the military column that is, or formation that is getting to them. All of this machine that was sending waves of human beings to Tigray, to Tigrayan Defense Forces, was being organized from Dese. That was where the headquarters was. So what the Tigrayan Defense Forces did was, instead of dealing with the human wave when it reaches them, they were trying to get to the machine, the engine that was actually producing the waves. So if, and of course not if, but when Dese fails, that engine would stop producing the human waves. So because of that significance, the fall of Wollo, and of course the fall of Dese, and of course Waldea, had tremendous significance, maybe a turning point in this war. Having said that, the Ethiopian military, the Ethiopian National Defense Force, is not in a shape where it could even continue to send, maybe relocating from Dese to Debre Birhan. It's not even in that position to continue to send waves to the Tigray Defense Forces, because after 4 offensives, since they left Mekelle, 4 offensives, after 4 offensives, it has lost its military cache, the weapons. It has lost the command structure, the colonels, the majors, the captains. These are the commanders of battalions, brigades, and divisions. They don't have those, and they cannot easily replace them. They could replace them with new recruits that are not trained, unable to fight. They could do that. But replacing that command structure, especially the middle-level command structure, is not going to be easy. And if you don't have the command structure and people who are competent in fighting, then that war is lost, to be honest. That war cannot be resumed whatsoever. On the other hand, like again, what is left to the Ethiopians, their last resort, their last tactic to try to defeat the Tigray Defense Force juggernaut is human wave, aerial bombardment, sabotage, and propaganda. That's all that is left to the Ethiopian Defense Forces. On the other hand, we have seen that the opponents, the Tigrayan Defense Forces, have demonstrated that they are very well commanded, strategies that are executed to perfection, mobilized the population that is fighting for survival. So this war has probably ended. The military aspect has ended, as far as I am concerned. What is left is the political front. What is going to happen? How is the war going to end in the political sense? What would be the next steps? That is where there is really no initiative. Maybe next week we might be able to see some initiatives moving toward like a transitional politics, at least the chatters and the discourse of transitional politics.
Thank you very much. The fact that you mentioned about the political thing, we don't even know what TPLF is thinking, and maybe beyond that. But what we know is these are three political parties, opposition political parties in Tigray. This statement is from them, from three. That's the Tigray Independence Party, the Salsai Wayane Tigray, and the National Congress of Greater Tigray or Great Tigray by Tona. And it's interesting here, they are at the first point asking for internationally monitored referendum on that and so on. So this is, I mean, they are before the war, in the election of 2020 September, there was this Tigray Independence Party that asked for separation. The two were in the middle, staying with Ethiopia, but making maybe implementing the constitution or changing it, all that. So we are seeing this coming out from these parties. Maybe as Professor Skell said, come next week, we might see more of this in terms of political statements. And we covered the issue of, or the subject of joint investigation last week. And today, was it today or there was a tweet from the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission that is jointly investigating the Tigray conflict, how they call it. And they are saying the report will be coming out on Wednesday next week. So this is 2 days before, after the plan, and they are saying there will be a press conference from Addis and Geneva, all that. So we'll be monitoring that, and by the time we meet next week, this would be something that we can touch upon as well, compared to what the panel said last week. But gentlemen, final words. Faisal?
Yes, I think I made my pessimistic and less expectation about the UN human rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission product. I think it's already, in my opinion, not big of a picture, and I don't take it very seriously because the war has gone beyond that point. I like to just make a quick comment of that little brochure or note that you shared with us regarding the Tigray TDF, position. Particularly, that's what struck me this morning when I read that referendum, international monitored referendum, should be conducted. That is in addition, an additional measure to their previous conditions. The rest are rehashed negotiation, what have you. But that prominent one and putting it number one really says a lot of story. And when you really examine it and go back, it is literally consistent with, say, what the ONLF has already said when they were coming to Addis as part of the peace negotiation in 2018. They said we will reserve the right of a plebiscite, mandated and managed by the international community. So what TDF is now putting forth is consistent, at least with some of the wishes of some of the major groups, such as Somalis, the same with the Oromo Liberation Front's program that seeks self-determination, and Sidama. Those three major groups I know. So I think we can talk about this next week, but there seems to be a theme emerging that's beyond beyond the conclusion of the war, and that would be very interesting to a lot of groups in the Ethiopian geography.
Thank you, Faisal. These are three parties, opposition parties, not from the official TDF. So, Professor Itzgal, last final word.
Yeah, I think the TPLF, or the Tigray government, is telegraphing its intentions through Geta Gabrahewitz. If you read that, that will probably be indicative of what they're thinking. Having said that, we earlier, Joseph talked about the ICG, and Faisal chimed in. In their effort to be formal, in their effort to be impartial or even-handed, And in their effort to address crisis wherever it happens in Ethiopia to lead to conflict resolution, they have become completely detached from reality, almost saying that if Tigray recovered its part of its Western Tigray, that would probably provoke the Sudanese, almost crossing over to condoning genocide. That this should not happen, as the title indicates, cutting a deal to stop bloodshed. I think that is not going to cut. What is going to cut this time is what Faisal said, because I hear from the Somali region, for instance, Mustafa has completely Amharized politics in the Somali region. In the Somali region, the least Amharized, the least Ethiopianized part of Ethiopia. So they call him not Mustafa Umar, they call him now Mesfin Amara. So that is the level to which the Amharization problem in Ethiopia has reached. So this idea of self-determination, the idea of self-determination that was associated with secessionist groups like the OLF, the ONLF, is going to gain currency in terms of the way forward and in imagining some kind of association in the Horn of Africa region. The forces of disintegration are gathering. The forces of implosion are, the clouds of implosion are gathering over Addis Ababa skies. And the only solution that seems to be standing right now and stood the test of time is self-determination for the nations and nationalities. That are going to be pivotal as a solution. That's my last word.
Thank you, Professor Rizgal. Yusuf Gabriel, your last final word.
Last word, okay. Again, let me comment on the three opposition parties. I have probably a little bit of a different take on that one, because this kind of writing are not only meant to be seen as a call for the outside, what to do for the outside world, but it seems to me it's done precisely to corner the TPLF. There is some kind of a tug of war going between the TPLF and the opposition parties. I don't know if you have noticed that. You have seen some of the leaders of the opposition parties coming out strongly, talking against the TPLF, and they have this suspicion that the TPLF might not go all the way to a referendum, and if it does, it might even sabotage it. That was at the beginning of. I'm not sure exactly what the kind of ideas they have right now, but there is what they are doing. It seems to me they are constantly putting the TPLF into a position where it had to respond, where it had to say to the Tigrayan people, I am for the referendum, because they still don't believe. They don't have that trust on the TPLF. So there is this tug of war, as I said, in between TPLF and the opposition parties. We have also to look at that side. It doesn't simply have to be looked at from the outside, from the outside world's view. Another thing is one of the things that Dr. Hiskel mentioned was about going to Dessie in order to stop the flow of humanity that's coming out from Dessie. I have always wondered, why did the TDF went all the way to Debre Tabor? Because I thought that was outstretching itself all the way to Debre Tabor. Especially, probably it is the biggest blunder that it has made in terms of military. Remember, it went all the way to Debre Tabor without plugging in a huge hole through the Wageltena front, through the Wageltena front. That is how they came, about 30,000 soldiers, Ethiopian soldiers, how they came in and for a time being occupied Geshina, which was, and that was why they have to retreat from Debre Tabor all the way to Geshina for about 140 kilometers of retreat. But then I began to understand, maybe what they were trying to do is, if we occupy the Amhara land, then we'll stop the source, as Professor Hizkel said in regard to Dessie. If we could, occupy the Amhara land, let's say, for example, Wollo and at the same time south and northern Gondar, then we stop the militias and the Fanos from coming out from those areas. That is the only reason I could come up with as to why they ventured, because I thought that it was a setback not only on the Debre Tabor front. When they failed, when they retreated from Debre Tabor to Geshina, it also happened that they had to retreat from the Debarik area and the Dabat area all the way to Adirkai.
So Yusuf, if I may interject here, I was reading this morning this book. This is by the former Vice President of Mengistu, Colonel Sadesta. So there is a section that says Wollo Front. It's talking about the 17 years struggle, and there he mentions that what the TPLF did at that time, or EPRDF, was to bypass Dessie, and just go to
just go the other way around.
But so maybe they were trying to do that, and they.
But what I saw is, for example, they could probably have bought some time had they only concentrated on the Dessie front instead of going to, the Gondar front and the Bahir Dar front, the Debre Tabor front. But to me, probably the only reason why they would do that would be to prevent, the very source of the, for example, the militias, the Fanos, the Lui Haile of Amharas. All of these are coming, especially from the Gondar area. Those are the ones who are the most militant. The idea was if they could capture Gondar, first, of course, they will have occupied the source of all this, of all these soldiers, and second, of course, they will have access to the Sudan. But the way I see it now is that the only way to stop it is to go faster than the rate of training that they could do. For example, nowadays the training has been kind of atrophied to only 2 weeks. Imagine they just teach them two weeks, and that's all that they have time. The reason is because the rate of the defeat of the army is greater than the rate of newly trained soldiers making it all the way to the front. So that formula, that balance, it has been offset. I believe it has been offset right now in the Dessie front, where tens of thousands of people have either died or wounded or being captured.
Great. So talking about making it shorter, I think we will be finishing with this clip. This is from ISAT. This is the pro-Abiy based in the US now, I think in Addis as well, in Finland as well. Just talking about the longer the war lasts, the better it will be for Ethiopians to defeat TDF. This is their word from today.
የትግራይ ወጣት እድሜ ለዩናይትድ ኔሽንስ በነፃ እህል ይሰጠዋል። የአማራና የአፋርን ህዝብ መውረሩ ብቻ ሳይሆን ከደጀኑ ሊመጣ የሚችል ሌላ ኃይል የለውም ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ጦርነቱ በረዘመ ቁጥር ጊዜ ከኢትዮጵያ ጎን ነው። ሶ እኔ ለኢትዮጵያውያን ማሳስበው ከኔ በለጠም አይ ቲንክ እየሆነ ያለ ነው። ጦርነቱን በአጭር ጊዜ ከማየት በረጅም ጊዜ ማየቱ ይጠቅመናል። ብዙ ኢትዮጵያውያን በተለያየ ቦታ በተለያዩ ክልሎች በፌደራል ማሰልጠኛ ጣቢያዎች እየሰለጠኑ ያለበት ሁኔታ ነው። ብዙ ኢትዮጵያውያን ቁርጥ አድርገው የህወሓትን ማንነት ቅድም መቲ እንዳለችው የህወሓትን ጭካኔ የህወሓትን አስከፊነት በቁርጠኝነት ተነስተዋል። ስለዚህ ጦርነቱን በረጅም ካየነው እኛ እንደምናሸንፍ ጥርጥር የለውም። ደሴ ውስጥ የተደረገ ነገር የለም። ከደሴ እየራቀ የሄደ ያለ ጦርነት ነው።
So this is what the government in a way is hoping will happen. But gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I'm sure our viewers got some insights on what has happened, what might happen, and we'll catch up again next week at the same time. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been following UMD Media's live show on Facebook and YouTube. Today's subject on the H panel was State of the Region, Latest Developments. We will catch up next week. Thank you for viewing. Please share, subscribe, like, so that many can reach this show today. The H panel signs off.